Have you ever stopped to think about how one moment, one cruel twist of fate, can wipe out the future you had planned and write a completely different one for you? Imagine a young woman who has just married her prince. Their future is clear and bright. A quiet, private life built on shared passions, far from the pressures of the throne. Then, just 7 weeks into their new life together, a catastrophic accident on a summer afternoon rips that future to shreds. She is no longer just a new bride navigating a new family. She is suddenly the wife of an unexpected heir, thrust into a life of public duty defined by a tragedy that will forever shape her destiny. Her name? Birgitte, Duchess of Gloucester. How can one build a meaningful life in the long, silent shadow of someone they barely know? And what does her story of 50 years of silent service reveal about the true cost of carrying a burden you were never meant to shoulder? Our story truly begins not in the heart of London, but in the pastoral landscapes of Northamptonshire, in an era that feels both distant and foundational to the modern monarchy. To understand the family Birgitte would marry into, you must first understand her parents-in-law, Prince Henry, the Duke of Gloucester, and his wife, Princess Alice. They were figures from a different age, embodying a certain stoicism and unwavering commitment to duty that was the hallmark of their generation. Prince Henry, born in 1900, was the third son of King George V and Queen Mary. This placed him in a unique and often challenging position. He was not the heir, nor was he the spare in the most immediate sense. That role fell to his elder brothers, the future Edward VIII and George VI. Henry was, for much of his early life, the quintessential military man, the soldier duke. He was bluff, straightforward, and by all accounts far more comfortable on a horse or in the barracks of his regiment, the 10th Royal Hussars, than he was in the gilded drawing rooms of Buckingham Palace. He was known for a fiery temper and a directness that could sometimes be mistaken for gruffness. He was a man of action, not of intricate court politics, and his relationship with his more famous brothers was complex. He was fiercely loyal to the crown, especially to his brother Bertie, who would become the reluctant King George VI after the abdication crisis, a crisis Henry viewed with profound disapproval. The woman he married, Lady Alice Montague Douglas Scott, was a revelation. Born into the high aristocracy as the daughter of the 7th Duke of Buccleuch, she was far from a cloistered debutante. Before her marriage in 1935, Lady Alice was a woman of remarkable independence and adventurous spirit. In an era when women of her class were expected to do little more than marry well, she spent years living and traveling in Kenya, immersing herself in a world utterly alien to the Scottish estates of her youth. She was a painter, a keen observer of the world, possessing a quiet grace that masked a will of steel. When she finally married Prince Henry at the relatively late age of 34, she brought a worldly perspective and a deep well of resilience to the royal family. Their marriage was a solid partnership, a union built on shared values of duty and service, even if their personalities differed. They settled into a life that balanced royal responsibilities with a genuine love for country living at their estate, Barnwell Manor. It was here, away from the constant scrutiny of London, that they raised their 2 sons, Prince William, born in 1941, and Prince Richard, born 4 years later in 1944. The 2 Gloucester princes could not have been more different, embodying the classic archetypes of the heir and the spare, yet with their own unique complexities. The elder, Prince William, was the heir to the dukedom, and from the moment he was born, he seemed destined for a life in the public eye. He was, in a word, dazzling, possessed of his father's dashing looks and his mother's adventurous soul. He grew into a young man who seemed to have been crafted by central casting for the role of a modern prince. He was educated at Eton and Magdalen College, Cambridge, where he earned a degree in history, but the classroom could barely contain his restless energy. William was a man who craved experience, who pushed boundaries. He was a licensed pilot, a passion that would become central to his identity. He wasn't content with gentle flights over the English countryside. He owned several aircraft and competed in amateur air shows. He undertook a perilous journey driving a Piper Comanche across the Sahara Desert. He went on safari in Africa. He possessed an easy charm and a quick wit that made him immensely popular, not just with the public, but within the often stuffy confines of the royal court. He was seen as a breath of fresh air, a James Bond figure who combined aristocratic lineage with a rugged daredevil spirit. After Cambridge, he took a step that was highly unusual for a senior royal at the time. He joined the diplomatic service seeking a career on his own merits. He was posted first to Lagos, Nigeria, and then, in a move that would change his life, to Tokyo, Japan, as a commercial attaché at the British Embassy. He wanted to be more than just a ceremonial figure. He wanted to be a man of substance in the world. It was in Tokyo that his story took a deeply personal and controversial turn. He fell passionately in love. The woman who captured his heart was Juzi Starkloff, a beautiful Hungarian divorcee and former model. She was several years his senior, a mother of two, and Jewish. In the rigid, protocol-bound world of the British monarchy in the late 1960s, she was, from every conceivable angle, a completely unsuitable match for the man who was then ninth in line to the throne. Their love affair was intense and genuine. William, for the first time, seemed to have found a partner who matched his own passionate and worldly nature. He contemplated marriage, a move that would have required him to renounce his place in the line of succession, a sacrifice he was reportedly willing to make. He wrote to his cousin, Queen Elizabeth II, informing her of his intentions. The response from the palace was swift and unequivocal. The Queen, advised by her courtiers, strongly discouraged the union. The specter of the abdication crisis, caused by Edward VIII's love for another divorcee, Wallis Simpson, still loomed large. The establishment, or the firm, as it's often called, could not countenance another such scandal. William was summoned back to the UK, ostensibly due to his father's declining health, but the underlying message was clear. The pressure to end the relationship was immense. Interestingly, one of the few senior royals who showed him any sympathy was Princess Margaret, herself no stranger to forbidden love, having been denied her own happiness with the divorced Peter Townsend. She reportedly told William, "Follow your heart." But the weight of duty, family expectation, and the unyielding machinery of the monarchy proved too much. Though he and Juzi would remain in contact, the dream of a life together was ultimately crushed by royal decree. William returned to his duties, a changed man, his characteristic zest for life tinged with a newfound melancholy. He had tasted a different kind of freedom and had it snatched away. While William was the glittering star, his younger brother Richard moved in a much quieter orbit. If William was the dashing adventurer, Richard was the pensive academic. He followed his brother to Eton and Cambridge, but his path diverged sharply from there. Richard was drawn not to diplomacy or the military, but to the world of art and design. He pursued a degree in architecture, a field for which he had a genuine passion and a considerable talent. Richard was the spare, and with that role came a degree of freedom his brother never had. He was not expected to take on the full burden of royal duties. His future was his own to shape, and he fully intended to become a practicing architect. After completing his studies, he joined a prestigious London firm and began carving out a professional career. He was thoughtful, reserved, and content to live a life largely outside the royal spotlight that his brother so naturally commanded. He was happy in William's shadow, not out of any lack of ambition, but because that shadow afforded him the space to pursue his own dreams. The two brothers were close, their different personalities complementing each other. William was the protector, the charismatic leader, while Richard was the steady, reliable confidant. It was in this world of academia and quiet professionalism that Prince Richard's life would intersect with that of a young Danish woman who was, in her own way, just as grounded and serious-minded as he was. Her name was Birgitte van der Henriksen. Born in Odense, Denmark, in 1946, Birgitte was the daughter of a lawyer. Her upbringing was comfortable, intelligent, and thoroughly ordinary. There was no hint of aristocracy in her background, no inkling of the extraordinary life that lay ahead. She was bright and studious, with a particular aptitude for languages. Seeking to perfect her English, she, like so many young Europeans of her generation, came to Cambridge to study at a language school. Cambridge in the late 1960s was a vibrant hub of intellectual and social activity. It was a place where worlds collided, where the children of dukes might find themselves sitting next to the children of merchants. It was in this melting pot of culture and ideas that Birgitte, the Danish language student, and Richard, the princely architecture student, met. Their introduction wasn't the stuff of fairy tales. It was a simple meeting through mutual university friends. Their courtship was much like their personalities, quiet, steady, and unpretentious. There was no whirlwind romance played out in the pages of the tabloids. It was a relationship built on a foundation of shared interests, intellectual connection, and a deep, abiding respect for one another. Richard was drawn to Birgitte's calm intelligence and serene poise. She was unfazed by his royal title, interested instead in the man himself, the architect, the intellectual, the quiet younger brother. For Birgitte, Richard represented a world of culture and history, but he did so without the overwhelming bombast that might have accompanied his older brother. They were a perfect, understated match. By the early 1970s, their relationship had deepened into a serious commitment. In February of 1972, Buckingham Palace formally announced the engagement of Prince Richard of Gloucester to Miss Birgitte van Deurs. The press coverage was positive, but muted. This was, after all, a minor royal. The union was seen as a sensible and happy one. Birgitte was welcomed as a sophisticated and intelligent addition to the family. For the young couple, the future looked clear and promising. They planned a life together in London, where Richard would continue his ascending career as an architect. Birgitte would support him, and together they would perform the occasional royal duty as required, but their life would be largely their own. They were not destined for the throne, and this was their greatest blessing. They had the privilege of royalty without its most crushing burdens. They could build a home, raise a family, and pursue a profession, all with a degree of privacy that was a rare commodity in the House of Windsor. The wedding was set for July. The year 1972 stretched before them, full of hope and the promise of a bright, well-designed future. Everything was in its place. The spring and early summer of 1972 were, for Prince Richard and his fiancée Birgitte, a time of quiet planning and joyful anticipation. Their world was one of blueprints and guest lists, of choosing wedding rings and imagining a future built to their own specifications. Richard was deeply engaged with his work at the architectural firm, savoring the final months of his life as a private professional before the happy but minor disruption of a royal marriage. Birgitte, meanwhile, was gracefully navigating the transition from Danish commoner to a future princess of the United Kingdom, learning the subtle nuances of a world that was, until now, completely foreign to her. Theirs was a love story unfolding in soft focus, a gentle prelude to a life of contented partnership and intellectual pursuits. Across the family, there was a sense of settled purpose. Prince William, ever the dynamic force of nature, had returned from his diplomatic posts and fully embraced his role as the heir to the Dukedom of Gloucester. With his father, Prince Henry, in increasingly frail health following a severe stroke in 1965, which left him largely incapacitated and led to a long period of declining health, William had become the de facto custodian of the family's extensive public duties. He managed the family estate at Barnwell, attended ceremonies, and represented the Queen with the effortless charm that had become his trademark. Yet for those who knew him well, there was a restless energy about him. The heartbreak over his thwarted love for Jussi Starkloff had left its mark. While he performed his duties impeccably, he seemed to pour all his remaining passion, all his unspent desire for freedom and control, into the one place where he was truly master of his own destiny, the sky. Flying was more than a hobby for William. It was an escape, a liberation from the gilded cage of his royal birthright. In the cockpit of his Piper Cherokee, thousands of feet above the ground, he was not just a prince of the blood royal. He was simply a pilot, judged only by his skill and daring. And he was a very, very skilled pilot. This passion led him on the August bank holiday weekend of 1972 to a place called Halfpenny Green Airfield near Wolverhampton. The event was the Goodyear International Air Trophy, a popular air race that drew talented amateur pilots and enthusiastic crowds. For Prince William, it was a perfect way to spend the holiday, a blend of competition, camaraderie, and the visceral thrill of flight. He was entered in the race, flying his own bright yellow plane, registration GAYPW. He was not alone. Accompanying him in the co-pilot seat was a friend and fellow aviator, Lieutenant Commander Viral Lance, a family man with 2 children. For both men, it was meant to be a day of exhilarating sport. August 28th dawned as a reasonably clear day. A crowd of around 30,000 spectators had gathered, their faces turned towards the sky in anticipation. The race was a demanding one, requiring pilots to navigate a tight circuit at low altitude and high speed. It was a test of nerve as much as skill. Prince William, as a member of the royal family, was naturally the star attraction. As he and Viral Mitchell taxied their Piper Cherokee to the runway, a ripple of excitement went through the crowd. This was what they had come to see, a handsome prince, a modern hero, defying gravity. The takeoff was the moment the day's festive atmosphere curdled into unimaginable horror. What happened next took place in a matter of seconds, a terrifyingly brief window between life and death. Almost immediately after lifting off the runway, the plane seemed to be in trouble. Eyewitnesses, many of them experienced pilots themselves, watched in confusion and then dawning terror. The aircraft performed an impossibly steep banking turn to the left, its wings seeming to dip precariously low. It was losing altitude rapidly, not climbing. On the ground, time seemed to slow down. A collective gasp rippled through the thousands of onlookers. They were witnessing a pilot in a desperate struggle for control. The plane's wing clipped the top of an ash tree. The impact, though seemingly minor, was catastrophic. It sent the aircraft spiraling, now completely out of control. It plunged nose first into an earth bank on the edge of the airfield, and in a heartbeat erupted into a massive, sickening ball of fire. A thick plume of black smoke billowed into the summer sky. a stark, ugly monument to the tragedy that had just unfolded. For a moment, there was a stunned, absolute silence. The roar of the explosion was replaced by a profound and chilling stillness, broken only by the panicked cries of those who had just witnessed the unthinkable. The festive air show had become a scene of devastation. Emergency crews scrambled towards the inferno, but it was immediately horribly clear that there could be no survivors. Prince William of Gloucester, the vibrant, daredevil prince, was dead. He was just 30 years old. News of a royal death travels with a brutal, unforgiving speed. While the general public was still reeling from the shocking radio and television bulletins, the grim task of informing the family began. The Queen, who was at Balmoral, was informed immediately. She was not just William's cousin. She held a deep affection for the dashing, slightly rebellious prince who brought such life to the family. Prince Charles, a fellow pilot and a close friend of William's, was said to have been utterly devastated, the loss cutting him deeply on both a personal and professional level. But the most devastating blow, of course, landed on the House of Gloucester. At Barnwell Manor, Princess Alice, that woman of incredible fortitude who had faced down every challenge life had thrown at her, was given the news that every mother dreads above all else. Her firstborn, her brilliant, adventurous boy, was gone. Prince Henry, his health already so fragile, was shielded from the initial shock, but the weight of the tragedy seemed to suck the very air from the family home. And then there was the newly married Prince Richard and his bride Birgitte. Having returned from their honeymoon, they were settling into the first weeks of married life, their minds on a future they thought was certain. The phone call that came that afternoon did not just inform them of a death, it announced the end of their lives as they knew them. In a single horrifying moment, Richard lost his only brother, the man who had been his counterpart his entire life, the charismatic figure he had looked up to and stood beside, was erased. And in that same moment, the life of a private architect died with him. The title, the duties, the full crushing weight of the dukedom now fell squarely and unexpectedly onto his shoulders. He was no longer the spare, he was the heir. The national grief was palpable. Flags were lowered to half-mast. Newspapers ran black-bordered front pages with solemn headlines mourning the lost prince. He had been a genuinely popular figure, his death in such a public and violent manner, sending a shockwave across the country. The funeral, held at St. George's Chapel in Windsor, was a deeply somber affair. The royal family, a model of public composure, could not hide the raw devastation. The image of Princess Alice draped in black, her face a mask of dignified grief, was heartbreaking. Beside her stood Richard, now thrust into the unenviable position of chief mourner, and the new hope of his shattered family, his fiancée Birgitte, quietly by his side. For Birgitte, this was the moment her life as a private individual ended forever. She was no longer just a new wife, but the wife of the new heir, suddenly tasked with supporting a husband through unimaginable grief, while simultaneously navigating a future she had never anticipated. Her introduction to the duties of the royal family was not a gentle orientation, it was a baptism by fire. She was learning their ways not through gentle guidance, but through shared, unspeakable sorrow. On July 8, 1972, Prince Richard married Birgitte van Deurs at St. Andrew's Church in Northamptonshire. It was the wedding they had always wanted, an intimate, joyful, and relatively private affair, far from the grand spectacle of a major royal event. The photographs from that day capture a couple genuinely in love, smiling and hopeful. Birgitte was a radiant bride in a simple, elegant gown of her own design, and Richard was a happy groom, looking forward to continuing his career as an architect. They embarked on their honeymoon and began their married life, a future filled with the promise of architectural projects, family, and quiet partnership. Their new life, built to their own specifications, had just begun. That future would last only 48 days. Their honeymoon was not a carefree escape. It was a brief respite before they had to return and face their new reality. For Richard, this meant the painful task of formally withdrawing from his architectural partnership. His dream, the career he had worked so hard to build, had to be packed away in a drawer, sacrificed on the altar of dynastic duty. He was now Prince William's successor in every sense, and that meant a life of full-time public service. For Birgitte, the immersion was total and immediate. She had to learn on her feet, not just the complexities of royal protocol, but how to be a source of constant, quiet support for a husband grieving his brother, and a mother-in-law enduring the unendurable. She had married a prince, but she had inherited a tragedy. The shadow of William, the beloved, charismatic prince who died too young, would loom large over their lives, shaping not only their duties, but also the public's perception of them. They were the replacements, the understudies forced onto the stage by a catastrophic accident. This period of transition was further complicated by the continued decline of the old Duke. Prince Henry never fully recovered from the shock of losing his eldest son. His health deteriorated rapidly. For 2 years, Richard served as the heir apparent in practice, managing the estate and the majority of the official duties. Then, on June 10, 1974, Prince Henry passed away. With his father's death, the final, irrevocable change was sealed. Prince Richard automatically inherited his father's titles. He was now His Royal Highness the Duke of Gloucester, and Birgitte, the lawyer's daughter from Denmark who had come to Cambridge to study English, was now Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Gloucester. The life they had planned was a distant memory, a new, far more demanding and far more public life, a life neither of them had ever wanted, had just begun. The death of Prince Henry in June 1974 was not a shock, but a final somber confirmation of a new reality. For 2 years, Prince Richard had been the heir in practice. Now he was the Duke-in-law. The title, the Duke of Gloucester, once destined for his charismatic older brother, was now his own. With it came not just the name and the coronet, but a vast and demanding inheritance of duty. He and Birgitte were no longer the future of the Gloucester line. They were its present, and they had to step into the full glare of their responsibilities. What they inherited was the machinery of a life dedicated to the crown. Prince Henry, as the son of a king, had accumulated a sprawling portfolio of over 60 patronages, military colonelcies, and charitable affiliations. These were not mere letterhead appointments. They were active roles requiring hundreds of engagements a year, from the windswept parade grounds of army barracks to the hushed boardrooms of medical charities. This was the life that now belonged to Richard, the architect, and Birgitte, the Danish academic. The transition was, by necessity, a study in contrasts. The public and the many organizations the Gloucesters represented had been accustomed to William. They knew his easy smile, his confident charm, his thrilling backstory. In his place now stood Richard, a man of quieter virtues. He was thoughtful, observant, and deeply intelligent, but he was not a natural showman. He approached his new duties with the meticulous precision of the architect he was trained to be, preparing for every engagement with thorough research and a genuine desire to understand the organizations he was visiting. He could speak with authority on architectural preservation, on urban planning, on history, but the easy small talk, the effortless charisma of his brother, was not his natural language. He made a crucial decision early on. He would not try to be a pale imitation of his brother. Instead, he would make the role his own. He skillfully began to integrate his life's passion into his royal work. As Duke, he became a powerful and respected advocate for architectural heritage and conservation. He didn't just show up to cut ribbons. He engaged in substantive debate. He wrote articles. He published books of his own photography, using his unique position to champion the causes he truly believed in. He became a fellow of the Royal Institute of British Architects and served as a commissioner for the Historic Building and Monuments Commission for England, later known as English Heritage. In doing so, he wasn't just filling a role, he was reshaping it, proving that a quieter, more intellectual approach could have its own profound impact. While Richard was redefining the role of Duke, Birgitte was quietly inventing her role as Duchess. Imagine her position. She was still in her 20s, a mother to a newborn son, Alexander, who was born just 4 months after his grandfather's death. She was still grieving for a brother-in-law she barely knew, but whose absence defined her existence, and she was now expected to perform on the public stage as a senior member of the world's most famous family. The learning curve was not just steep, it was near vertical. She approached it with the same quiet diligence as her husband. She began accepting her own patronages, initially drawn to causes that resonated with her own experiences and interests. As a linguist and someone educated in the arts, she was a natural fit for organizations like the Royal Academy of Music. As a young mother, she developed a deep empathy for causes related to children's welfare and health care. One of her earliest and most enduring patronages was with Bliss, a special care baby charity, a cause she has championed for decades with heartfelt dedication. Her style began to emerge, and it was one of understated effectiveness. She was never the royal who would arrive with a huge entourage and a dramatic flourish. Instead, those who worked with her spoke of a woman who arrived impeccably briefed, who had read all the background papers, and who asked intelligent, incisive questions. A volunteer at a charity event once remarked, "You felt she was there because she genuinely wanted to understand, not just because it was on her schedule. She listens more than she talks, and when she does speak, it has substance." This was the hallmark of the new Duchess of Gloucester. Substance over style, diligence over drama. Amidst this whirlwind of new duties, they were also building a family. After Alexander, the Earl of Ulster, was born in 1974, Lady Davina followed in 1977, and Lady Rose in 1980. Their home was apartment 1 at Kensington Palace, a vast and magnificent residence with over 20 rooms, steeped in history. It had once been the home of Princess Louise, the artistic daughter of Queen Victoria. Now, it was the Gloucester family's London base, a place where the official and the personal were constantly intertwined. In one part of the apartment, secretaries would be scheduling state visits. In another, children would be playing on the floor. Their neighbors at Kensington Palace were, at various times, Princess Margaret, Prince and Princess Michael of Kent, and, most famously, the Prince and Princess of Wales, Charles and Diana. This proximity to the epicenter of royal celebrity only served to highlight the Gloucester's profoundly different path. While the world's media laid siege to the gates of Kensington Palace, desperate for a photograph of Diana and her young sons, Richard and Birgitte made a conscious, determined effort to shield their own children from the glare. They were adamant that Alexander, Davina, and Rose should have as normal an upbringing as their unique circumstances would allow. They attended regular schools, and their appearances at public events were kept to an absolute minimum. It was a quiet rebellion against the goldfish bowl of royal life, a reflection of their own deeply held values for privacy and family. Throughout this period, another key female figure was a constant presence, Princess Alice, the Dowager Duchess. After her husband's death, she did not retreat from public life. Instead, she continued with her own duties with the stoicism that had defined her. She became the longest living member of the British royal family in history, a living link to a bygone era. For Birgitte, her mother-in-law must have been an invaluable source of support and a formidable role model. Here was a woman who had navigated a lifetime of royal duty, who had borne unimaginable grief with unwavering grace. The bond between these two women, the grand dame of the old guard and the quiet Danish woman who had stepped into her son's shoes, must have been complex and deeply poignant. Alice represented the past Birgitte was now part of, and in Birgitte, Alice saw the future of the family line her lost son was supposed to lead. As the 1980s roared on, the media landscape around the royal family transformed into a frenzied spectacle. The fairy tale wedding of Charles and Diana, followed by the arrival of the glamorous Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, created an insatiable public appetite for royal news. It was the era of dimania, of warring princesses, and front-page fashion battles. The focus of the world's press narrowed to a laser point on these two charismatic and often troubled young women. And where, in all of this, was the Duchess of Gloucester? She was there all along, working tirelessly in the background. While Diana was on the cover of Vogue, Birgitte was visiting a military base in Germany. While Fergie was holidaying with a Texan millionaire, Birgitte was opening a new wing of a regional hospital. She was undertaking hundreds of engagements a year, traveling the globe on behalf of the Queen, quietly fulfilling the unglamorous day-to-day work that keeps the monarchical machine running. It was in this era that the moniker, the little-noticed Duchess, truly took hold. It wasn't meant unkindly. It was simply a statement of fact. Her work, her dedication, her very existence was rendered almost invisible by the blinding supernova of her more famous sisters-in-law. This was partly a consequence of the media's obsession, but it was also a reflection of her own nature. She never courted the press. She gave no revealing interviews. She engaged in no public dramas. Her focus remained, as it always had, on the job at hand. She embodied the old royal maxim, often attributed to the Queen Mother: never complain, never explain. The so-called Gloucester curse took on a new meaning during these years. It was no longer about a singular violent tragedy, but about a more subtle, enduring condition, the fate of being perpetually overshadowed, of being defined by an absence, and of carrying the family name forward in a world that was always looking somewhere else. But to call it a curse is to miss the point entirely. For in these shadows, away from the destructive pressures of intense fame, Richard and Birgitte found a way to thrive. They built a stable marriage, raised a well-adjusted family, and created lives of genuine purpose, defined not by public adoration, but by the quiet satisfaction of a duty honorably discharged. They became the monarchy's steady, reliable anchors in an era of turbulent seas. She has been the patron of the Lawn Tennis Association, a loyal supporter of the Royal Air Force Benevolent Fund, and a constant presence for countless schools and charities who see her not as a global superstar, but as their Duchess, a consistent, compassionate figure who has been with them for decades. She built her identity not on a grand stage, but in the countless small, meaningful interactions that make up a life of service. By the turn of the millennium, as the royal family reeled from the shocks of divorce and the death of Diana, the Gloucesters stood as a testament to continuity and quiet resilience. Birgitte was no longer the novice princess thrown in at the deep end. She was now a seasoned senior member of the firm, one of its most experienced and hardest working assets, even if the world at large had barely noticed. The dawn of the 21st century found the British monarchy in a period of intense introspection. The tragic death of Diana, Princess of Wales, in 1997 had been a watershed moment, forcing a reevaluation of the relationship between the crown and the public. The firm, as it's known, entered the new millennium with a quiet but urgent mandate to modernize, to appear more accessible, more relatable, and to demonstrate clear value for money. The age of extravagant royal celebrity was giving way to a new emphasis on a work ethic, on tangible results, and on a more streamlined professional approach to duty. For some members of the family, this was a difficult adjustment. But for the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester, it was a world they already inhabited. Their entire royal life had been built on a foundation of quiet diligence and unshowy dedication. The very qualities that had once made them seem overshadowed and little noticed now became their greatest strengths. In an institution actively trying to project an image of hard work and public service, Richard and Birgitte were the genuine article, the living embodiment of that ethos for nearly 3 decades. The year 2002 was a microcosm of this new reality. It was the year of the Queen's Golden Jubilee, a moment intended for national celebration of her 50 years on the throne. The Gloucesters were, as ever, integral to the extensive program of events, undertaking tours and attending services as key representatives of the monarch. But the year was also cloaked in immense personal sadness for the Queen. In February, her sister, Princess Margaret, died. Just 7 weeks later, her mother, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, passed away at the age of 101. In this atmosphere of profound grief mixed with public pageantry, the steadfast, unwavering support of the wider family became more critical than ever. The Gloucesters were part of the emotional bedrock for the Queen, a reassuring presence that symbolized continuity in a time of painful loss. Their role was not to be in the spotlight, but to hold the line, to carry out their duties with the same quiet dignity as always, allowing the Queen the space to mourn while ensuring the machinery of monarchy continued to function. For Birgitte, this period marked another significant, though deeply personal, turning point. On October 29, 2004, her mother-in-law, Princess Alice, the Dowager Duchess of Gloucester, died peacefully in her sleep at Kensington Palace. She was 102 years old, and at the time of her death was the longest living member of the British royal family in history. Princess Alice's passing was more than just the end of a remarkable life. It was the severing of the final living link to a bygone era. She was the last of the great Edwardian aristocrats in the family, a woman who had been a duchess for nearly 70 years, who had known 5 monarchs, and who had borne witness to the entire sweep of the 20th century. For the Gloucester family, her death was the closing of a foundational chapter. The stoic matriarch, whose own life had been marked by adventure and tragedy, was gone. For Birgitte, this must have been a moment of profound reflection. For 30 years she had been the Duchess, but always with the formidable presence of the Dowager Duchess in the background. Now she stood alone as the matriarch of the Gloucester line. The torch had well and truly been passed. The Danish lawyer's daughter was now the sole keeper of the Gloucester flame. The senior woman of a ducal house she had entered under the most tragic of circumstances. The quiet bond she had shared with Alice, a bond forged in shared duty and unspoken understanding of the family's painful history, was now a cherished memory. This new seniority coincided with a subtle but important shift in her relationship with the Queen. While rarely the subject of public commentary, the bond between Queen Elizabeth II and her cousin-in-law, the Duchess of Gloucester, was one of deep mutual respect and quiet trust, nurtured over decades of shared family life and public service. They were, in many ways, women cut from the same cloth. Both possessed a profound, almost sacred, sense of duty. Both shunned emotional excess and public drama, preferring a practical, get-on-with-it approach to life. Birgitte, like the Queen, understood the fundamental bargain of royalty. A life of immense privilege must be paid for with a lifetime of unwavering service. The Queen, a shrewd judge of character, would have recognized and deeply valued Birgitte's quiet competence, her reliability, and her absolute discretion. As the Queen and Prince Philip inevitably began to slow down in their 80s and 90s, they delegated more and more responsibilities. It was during this time that the true value of experienced, steadfast royals like the Gloucesters became undeniable. Birgitte was increasingly called upon to represent the sovereign, not just at home, but on the world stage. She undertook solo tours across the Commonwealth, from Australia to the Caribbean, carrying out her duties with the same poise and professionalism she had displayed for decades. She was a safe pair of hands, a trusted envoy who could be relied upon to represent the crown with dignity and without any risk of controversy. She was never just a stand-in. She was an extension of the Queen's own values. This quiet elevation continued even as a new, vibrant generation of royals captured the public imagination. The world watched, entranced, as Prince William married Catherine Middleton and Prince Harry married Meghan Markle. Once again, the media landscape was dominated by glamorous young women, by fashion choices and fairy tale narratives. Yet, this time, the context was different. The Duchess of Gloucester was not rendered invisible. Instead, her steadfastness served as a vital counterpoint, a symbol of the enduring institution behind the dazzling personalities. She became a physical embodiment of the monarchy's institutional memory. While the younger royals launched ambitious global initiatives, Birgitte continued with the essential grassroots work that has always been the monarchy's strength. She maintained her connections with patronages she had held for over 40 years. For the men and women of the Adjutant General's Corps or the Royal Army Dental Corps, she was not a distant figurehead. She was their colonel-in-chief, a familiar face who had visited them in Germany, Cyprus, and across the UK, a constant in their institutional lives. At the grand state occasions of the 21st century, the Diamond Jubilee in 2012, the Platinum Jubilee in 2022, her place in the royal tableau was assured. Watch the footage of those iconic Buckingham Palace balcony appearances. The front row is, rightly, reserved for the monarch and the direct heirs, but look just behind them, and you will almost always see the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester. They are not jostling for position. They are simply there, as they have always been, constant, reliable, a part of the unshakable foundation. The balcony itself is a visual metaphor for their role, not the focus of the picture, but an essential part of its composition. And so, what is the legacy of this little-noticed Duchess? In re-examining her life, the very notion of the Gloucester curse seems to miss the mark. The tragedy that shaped her destiny was not in the end a curse, but a catalyst. It was the brutal event that forged her character and set her on a path of extraordinary, if understated, significance. The very shadow she was forced to inhabit became her sanctuary, protecting her from the corrosive pressures of modern celebrity and allowing her to cultivate a life of genuine substance. Her contribution is not measured in magazine covers or television interviews. It is measured in decades, 50 years of unbroken public service. It is measured in the thousands of quiet handshakes, the countless hours spent listening to the concerns of ordinary people in community halls and hospital wards. It is measured in the unwavering stability she and her husband provided to the institution they serve, and in the profound dignity with which she has carried a ducal name forever marked by a great sorrow. She has perfectly and quietly honored the implicit promise of royalty, a life of privilege, paid for in the currency of a life of service. On September the 8th, 2022, the world stood still as Buckingham Palace announced the death of Queen Elizabeth II. The longest reign in British history had come to an end. An era had passed, and a new one, under King Charles III, was about to begin. For the nation, it was a moment of profound uncertainty and change. And for the monarchy's most steadfast and perhaps most underestimated servant, it marked the final monumental shift in a life defined by duty. The queen she had served so loyally for half a century was gone. The question now was, what did the future hold for the quiet Duchess? The death of Queen Elizabeth II in September 2022 was a moment that fractured modern British history into a before and an after. The Second Elizabethan Age, a period of unprecedented longevity and continuity, was over. As the nation and the world mourned, a new era began under King Charles III. With this transition came inevitable questions about the future shape of the monarchy itself. For years, there had been speculation about the new king's vision for a slimmed-down institution, one focused on the monarch and the most direct heirs to the throne. In this climate of change, many observers wondered what the future would hold for the wider royal family. What would be the role for the diligent yet less known working royals like the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester? Having given half a century of their lives to the service of the Queen, would they now be honorably retired, their duties absorbed by a smaller core group? It seemed a plausible end to their long careers in public service, but the reality of monarchy, the sheer unceasing volume of its work, dictated a different path. King Charles, upon his accession, needed stability and experience more than ever. He needed the steadfast support of those who knew the institution inside and out. And so, the Gloucesters were not sidelined. They were essential. In the somber ceremonies that followed the Queen's death and in the historic pageantry of the coronation, in May 2023, the Duke and Duchess were visibly present, their places in the royal processions and on the Buckingham Palace balcony, a clear and deliberate signal from the new king. Their decades of loyal service were not being forgotten. They were being honored and relied upon. For Birgitte, now approaching her 80s, there was no sign of retreat. Her schedule of engagements continued unabated. She remains to this day one of the hardest working members of the royal family, a figure of remarkable endurance. In the new Carolean era, she serves as a vital bridge to the past, a living embodiment of the institutional memory and unwavering sense of duty that defined his mother's reign. And so as we reach the present day, we can finally look back at the entirety of her extraordinary journey and ask the question that has lingered in the background of her story. Was she, as some might have romantically suggested, the woman engulfed by the Gloucester curse? Was her life defined and diminished by the tragedy that set its course? The answer, when viewed through the lens of a lifetime of evidence, is a resounding no. She was not engulfed by the tragedy. She absorbed it, processed it, and built a life of profound purpose upon its foundations. She did not allow the shadow of Prince William's death to extinguish the light of her own potential. Instead, she brought her own quiet, steady flame to a family name that was cloaked in darkness, and for over 50 years, she has tended to it with unwavering grace. She did not become a victim of the Gloucester story. She became its quiet, resilient heroine. Her life has been a masterclass in a form of strength that our modern world often fails to recognize. It is not the strength of loud pronouncements or charismatic leadership. It is the quieter, deeper strength of emotional fortitude. Imagine the resilience required to step into a new country and a new family simultaneously, and to find that family shattered by grief. Imagine the character needed to support a husband who had not only lost his brother, but also his own chosen future. Imagine the grace it took to spend a lifetime representing a family, knowing your place in it was created by another's absence, and to do so without a single public hint of complaint or self-pity. Her triumph is not found in the annals of grand historical events, but in the quiet consistency of her life. The enduring, stable partnership with her husband, Prince Richard, the successful raising of 3 children, shielded from the worst excesses of royal fame, the 50-plus years of flawless public service, executed with diligence and a profound lack of ego. In an age of fleeting fame and disposable commitments, her life stands as a monument to endurance. Ultimately, the story of Birgitte, Duchess of Gloucester, matters because it reminds us of a fundamental truth, that history is not solely written by the figures in the spotlight. Institutions, nations, and families are held together by the vital, often unseen work of the supporting cast. Her life gives dignity and meaning to that role. She demonstrates that significance is not dependent on visibility, and that a life of quiet contribution can be just as impactful and perhaps more authentic than a life spent chasing headlines. She is the little-noticed duchess who became one of the monarchy's most steadfast pillars, the Danish commoner who became the epitome of British royal duty. Hers is not a fairy tale, with its simple narrative of a princess finding her prince. It is something far more real, more complex, and ultimately more inspiring. It is the story of a woman who was handed a life she never expected, marked by tragedy, and turned it into a testament to the enduring power of dignity, resilience, and the quiet beauty of a life dedicated to service. She did not live in a shadow cast by others. She learned to shine with her own steady, unwavering light,